Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to an episode of I Didn't Sign Up for This. Hey, Carrie, what are we talking about tonight?
Hey, Tim. This week I want to talk about boundaries. It's something that's been on my mind quite a bit. And I think that, and obviously I can give you a woman's perspective, but I do think that sometimes it's difficult for women to set the proper boundaries in the relationships in their lives. And boundaries are important for any healthy relationship, whether it be a work relationship, a romantic relationship. If a woman has children, like how does she set the right boundaries and still keep part of herself? And I've had some really good discussions, and a couple of things happened this week to really make me realize that I need to reassess my own boundaries in life and in some of the relationships that I have. And so with that, there's been a little bit of, contemplation on where I used to be and some of the relationships that I have. I'll tell you, I have always been that friend that you could call in the middle of the night if you needed a ride home or if there was something going on. And I would be there for people. And often when you are somebody like that, you're there for them almost at your own expense, right? So every time you step over maybe a line to support a friend in need, you give a little bit of your boundary away. And I think that that's normal. I think that's normal to a point, right? Like we want to be there for each other and we want to support each other and make sure that, we're compromising and we're communicating and we have the right people in our lives and the right relationships. Now, I'm going to give you an example of where that goes terribly wrong. And this is something that I talked about in my book a few years ago when I talked about making sure that you have the right people in your corner and you have the right support systems. I had a friend who, bless her heart, she was a good friend for a long time. And as we got older, she kind of went down this path of always being the friend that had a lot of problems, whether it be emotional, life problems, relationships. And it was one of those situations where every time she had a concern or she had an issue in her life, everything needed to stop. Everybody needed to stop to help her through it. But, and that's fine if you can return the favor and you're not always the one with the trauma. Right? Because we all have things that we go through in life. We need a support system. We need somebody to hear us and understand us and vice versa. But if you're always the one who is waving the white flag, needing everyone to come in and save them, that doesn't really leave a lot of room to play a supporting role to anyone in your life. So this friend, she moved away. And, like I said, we met when I think I was 18 or 19 years old. And so we had been friends for years. And after she moved away, I've always worked a fairly early job, right? Get up early in the morning, get to work in that corporate job, doing my thing. There were times that she would call me at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning consistently because she would get off work at midnight and she would want somebody to talk to about whatever trauma she was going through at work or with her boyfriend, or in relationships with her family. I was a life coach to her before I was a certified life coach. Like literally that was my role in her life. And she got into this habit where, and I sleep with my phone by my bed. I know it's probably the worst possible scenario, but I do. I work for a telecommunications company. I've got my phone on my side almost all the time. But she would call me consistently between 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning and want to talk for like an hour and a half. And I would engage in that. So my phone would ring and I would think, oh, here comes Barbara, totally upset about something again. Let me get the call. Let me see what's going on. Let me help her fix it. Let me fix it for her. And I would talk to her till 2:30 in the morning and then turn around and get up at 5:30 in the morning and I would be exhausted. And it really started to wear on me because I had this internal dilemma. Because on one side, I wanted to be there for a friend in need, but on the flip side, I also needed sleep. I literally had a taxing job. I needed to be alert. I needed to be ready to conquer the day. And when you're up for 2 or 3 hours in the middle of the night, listening to someone's trauma night after night after night, every time it happens, you really start to resent that person. And so, she's no longer in my life anymore. But that's really where setting the proper boundary sparked for me. I've also, like most women in their teens and 20s, I definitely was in relationships with boys that probably lacked the proper boundaries, and you had to reassess and you had to learn those. And I don't think that there's enough being taught out there for us to understand the boundaries that need to be set and what that looks like. And so I think it definitely warrants some conversation. I think in order for you to get the life that you want to get, be who you want to be, you can't let the relationships in your life conflict with those priorities. They have to complement them.
Right. Well, I obviously this is a very common problem, all too common. I see it all the time. I'm seeing it more in the world of business development than in personal life, because that's kind of where my practice is focused, right? And so you would expect, but the underlying impetus for the problem is the exact same thing, which is you have failed to design the life you want. You as an individual, it's not, Barbara might be Barbara's designed exactly the life she wants. She wants to get off work at 11 or midnight and chit chat with you for an hour, right? And she's getting it. She has set a goal and designed a life, and she's getting exactly what she wants. Whereas you, you in the plural sense, right? Anybody listening, anybody who's been through this, if you identify with the problem that's being discussed, you have to realize that you've created the problem and you can solve the problem, and only you can solve the problem, right?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And the thing you have failed to do in the abstract, to the great and rhetorical you all, is design the life the way you want it. You have not trained the stakeholders in your life what is and is not appropriate behavior. One of the best lines that we used to say from the stage all the time is that, and we applied it to business, is every business has a business plan, either by design or by default. Every sales organization has a sales script, either by design or by default. Because whatever finds its way into your sales script, or whatever finds its way into your business plan, or your relationship, your significant other, your children, your marriage, your pets, everything, either you created that with the end in mind, or you allowed it to come into being just by reacting to things as they happened. And so I think the real breakthrough for people, if you're suffering with this kind of thing, is to, number one, sit down with me, myself, and I, and figure out exactly what I want my life to look like in very intimate detail. And then evaluate the people in your life. You don't necessarily have to carve people out of your life. And it sounds like life just kind of separated the two of you and Babs. I didn't know Babs, but
Babs.
But you and Babs went your separate ways because of just life, right?
She went on to be a very famous musician.
What a voice on that woman.
She honed it in the middle of the night quite often.
Yes. Barbara.
No, I honestly, I will tell you what happened. I will tell you that when I realized that my boundaries were being blown apart, and you have to understand too that I'm not a person who embraces conflict. I will shy away from conflict. I'm definitely the person that goes elusive in the face of conflict. I don't like it because I don't like to hurt other people. And I don't like the argument. I don't like the feeling that I get when I engage in that behavior or that attitude. So when I realized that she was not understanding that I needed my sleep, and I mean, this went on and off for years. This isn't something that happened twice. And I said, hey, we need to stop this. At first I stopped answering the phone. And so I just started putting my phone on do not disturb so that when the phone rang in the middle of the night, it wasn't an issue. And then I would only answer the phone when she called me and I was awake and it was convenient for me. And it was something, and guess what? She still wanted the same thing. And I would coach her and I would say all these things, but I think the pivotal moment was when I stopped letting her make excuses for the choices that she was making, and I stopped trying to help her fix it. Because it wasn't my responsibility to fix or save her life. And she was putting me in that role. And I just started shifting my responses to open-ended questions versus recommendations. And once I started holding her accountable to her own decisions, she stopped calling as much, and then she faded out. Well, and I think you have to, so there are different kinds of boundaries, right? Because even though I knew what to do with her, I think that there are romantic relationships that I've had in my past, even after she exited stage left. There were romantic relationships where I gave more than I ever got back. And I told myself it was enough. And that's a common thing, I think, when you are an unselfish person. I've seen both men and women do it. I've had friends who are of both genders who have shown up to relationships and given more than their fair share for just a percentage back of time, attention, physical, emotional, mental needs. And they told themselves it was enough. Where the healthiest relationships I've seen are based on open communication, where, it's not about me constantly telling my boyfriend or husband, I need you to take out the garbage. Neither one of them listen. But it's about saying, hey, when you take out the garbage, it makes me feel like you value the need that I have for you to help me around the house. And if you position it in a way that you're communicating the feeling behind the ask, as opposed to nobody wants to be the nag who's like, can you take the garbage out? Can you take the garbage out? Hey, about that garbage. And I do think that a lot of people will take that approach because I want it done my way, where if I just said, hey, my dear boyfriend / husband, if you could just help me by taking out the garbage, then that would show me that you value our support around here. Like you value contribution. And I made a joke with somebody. I was talking to a guy earlier today, and I said, he said something about he believed in shared responsibilities in relationships. And I was impressed by that, because he said, I have always, one thing that I have always wanted in a relationship is to be able to cook with the man that I'm with. And I've never had that. I've always been the cooker. And I think that it would be really cool to share that time in the kitchen and make dinner together, or, make lunch together. I have a friend who food preps with her husband every week, and I love it. I love hearing about it because it's just something that's really cool. It's something that appeals to me. And so when I was talking to this guy today, and he said, just so you know, he said, I am the type of person where I believe in that shared responsibility. He's like, I'm not having somebody do my laundry or cook my meals for me. It's something that I am sharing and equally taking care of. And that was so appealing to me because I don't know how often that happens. I do know that it swings one end of the spectrum to the other. And so it happens to both men and women. I mean, look at all the things that you've done consistently around your home. You've played that role with your kids their entire lives. And so I think it's interesting. And, we come from a family where we all cook. And so we all are in the kitchen cooking. Mom taught us all to cook. And so to have brothers who go in and throw together a meal, that's really cool. But then you go out into the world and you date guys who are like, so what are you going to make for dinner? If I'm going to ask you to do something and you don't necessarily do it the way that I want it done. Wouldn't it be better for me just to go ahead and do that, and maybe you take on something else? But I've actually seen that belittling in relationships where the man in this particular scenario, the man that I knew was doing something to help around the house, and all he met was criticism about the way that he did it. And ultimately, later on, I talked to him, and he admitted that that was the beginning of the end of his relationship, that he couldn't do anything right. And now here's the thing that I think women don't realize. And I'm not saying that women are the bad guys, because we're not. I think that we just, there are two things that I learned. I did a seminar a few years back called Understanding Men. And the first part of the seminar was really about understanding women, because in order for us to understand men, we have to be able to understand ourselves. And there is beauty in the fact that we don't think alike, but yet there are women who treat men like dysfunctional women because they don't think like we do, when really the beauty in it are the differences. Like, I can go to a man and I can get a perspective that I myself may not be able to come up with, and then that's a beautiful thing, and vice versa. And together they fit, and they work together. But there has to be, the moment that you start judging the person that you're in a relationship with for not thinking the way that you do, whether you're a man or a woman, your relationship is doomed to fail. I think you bring up a really good point about the fact that we have to set boundaries for ourselves as well. And if we don't have those boundaries, I mean, we all do, right? Like, I don't buy junk food during the week. Like, if I want a treat or something, I'll go get ice cream on a Friday night and have ice cream on a Friday night. What I try to avoid is having it in the house during the week and making it a treat on the weekend. So that's a boundary that I set for myself. I'm not putting a barrier up saying I can never have ice cream again, because it's wonderful and delicious. Mm-hmm. But I also understand that if I have it in the house, I'll have ice cream every night.
Yes.
And so we have to set those boundaries for ourselves. I'll see you this weekend. We'll go get some ice cream.
I've fallen victim to the old blue bunny myself from time to time.
The Dairy Queen.
The Dairy Queen just shows up and,
bitch.
You will eat ice cream, peasant. Yes, ma'am. Yes, mistress, I shall, if you say so.
With chocolate syrup, please. Yeah, so I think that you make a good point. Like, we have to set boundaries for ourselves if we want to move forward. And then once we've established our own boundaries and what it looks like, it's okay to branch out and understand what our boundaries are with other people.
Right.
If you have no boundaries with the people in your life, you will be miserable. You'll be overworked. You'll be exhausted. You'll be empty. And the alternative to that is actually being more assertive, more productive, happier, having more stable, high functioning relationships with everyone in your life. People will respect your boundaries. If they don't respect your boundaries, they're not your people.
Right. You're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, I have lived this with Bo, as you well know, and perhaps others. So I've got this Down syndrome son. Mm-hmm. And huge part of my life. But I remember when he was just a little boy and we were living in this house and there were no real boundaries for him. And it made him incredibly nervous. And I'm talking physical boundaries, right? There was no fence around the yard. And so we went and we put in a fence around the whole house, around the front yard, around the backyard, all the way down. You know, we actually owned the lot next door. That was fenced in. The whole thing was just fenced, right? Mm-hmm. And his stress level went down so profoundly once we had the fences in and the, childproof latches and locks and that sort of thing. because now he could go anywhere that he wanted to go without feeling scared, number one, or getting in trouble, secondly. You know, he knew what his boundaries were. He knew what his boundaries were. He knows that if I go further than point X, if I go past that fence somehow, and of course he couldn't at the size and age that he was, but if I go past that fence, then that's where trouble begins for me. But anywhere inside this fence, I am absolutely and utterly free. I'm free to explore and do anything I want within reason inside my boundaries.
Nice.
And so having our own boundaries is incredibly important. As a matter of fact, you can't really be free without some type of boundary. That's why, that's why we live in a Christian nation. That's why religion is so popular. People want to know, hey, what can I do or not do, get away with or not get away with? And we want a good, solid, established boundary and know what to expect. It's also incredibly important in work. I have consulted with companies over the years where I would do these analyses. We'd do these one-on-one consultations, basically interviews with different employees, and I would ask them to tell me what their job was. Many, 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 you would be astounded at how few people had ever even read their own job description, had no idea what their job was. And then I asked them to tell me, so how do you know when you're doing your job? How do you know when you're doing it right? And how do you know when you're doing it well? Crickets. Had no clue.
Wow.
Don't know what my job is. Don't know when I'm doing well. Right? Don't know what the components are of that. And I mean, it's a little easier when you're working with a sales organization because it's kind of numbers on the board. But that's really not true either, because there are ways to get numbers on the board that are completely unethical. And unethical, nothing's going to sink your organization faster than an unethical salesperson. I mean, it will build a bad reputation for you faster than you can believe.
Agreed. Agreed. So really, I mean, boundaries are healthy. Boundaries are necessary.
Right. I mean, the fact of the matter is, without appropriate boundaries, then it's like a ship without a rudder, right? Where are you going? Well, I'm going wherever the wind blows me. And that is living a life of default. No explorer in the world ever went out and climbed on that ship and said, we're just going, wherever the wind blows, that's where we'll wind up that day. It doesn't happen because it doesn't work. You've got to have an established goal. You've got to have very specific boundaries and knowing the level of freedom that you experience inside of those boundaries. Because with no boundary, anything goes. You just can't accomplish anything.
Right. Well, that puts it into perspective for sure, because we're basically saying boundaries are your freedom. And I think a lot of people look at boundaries as something restrictive and it limits you. But the truth is you will be more free.
You are more free with appropriate boundaries. You absolutely are.
I like it. So, you don't have to say yes. You don't have to say no, but you do have to assess your answer based on your boundaries when decisions come up for you to make.
Right.
So.
Does it fall in line with the life that you have designed? Does it agree with your hopes and dreams and goals and the life that you've designed for yourself? And if the answer is no, then you've got a boundary there. And you need to establish that boundary and respect it and force other people to respect it as well. You are not free in a just completely limitless world. There's got to be some level of contrast so that you can tell what's best for you versus what's not. If you don't have the contrast, then you don't know where you are. It's like being out on an open ocean with no compass and no islands and no stars at night. You're just out free floating. You don't know where you are. And so you're not going to get to wherever you think it is you want to be because you haven't established even what that is. And so that is a huge problem. You've got to establish. I mean, think about any work relationship without boundaries, right? There's no boundaries whatsoever. We're a very progressive, forward-thinking company, and you can just come to work whenever you want to be here, and you can just leave whenever you want to leave, and we'll just pay you whatever you think you deserve. And,
you can do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, you're not going to have a company. because nothing's
Right.
going to get done. It's this underlying notion that people will go to work just for the joy of working. And the fact of the matter is, while the sentiment is relatively true, people do get a lot of self-satisfaction and pleasure out of a job well done. That's not enough. You also have to pay them. You also have to hold them accountable. You also have to have some form of a retribution or a shortcoming if they fail to accomplish that goal. Because without all of those elements in place, you will stray. You will wander. And if there's no fence line, then wandering doesn't matter. Imagine you had a marital relationship that was just like, yeah, come on home whenever you want to, leave whenever you want to, pay the bills if you want to, help if you don't. It's just, let's be together and be happy in the moment. While that sounds very, very zen, it's also utterly ridiculous. It's just,
well, there's no commitment.
You're going to absolutely fail. And there's no commitment. There's no goal. There's nothing in mind. There's no direction. You don't just go get in your car and well, throw her in gear and see where we wind up. Well, I can tell you where you're going to wind up. You're going to wind up someplace you don't want to be because you haven't designed it from the word go. And that's the key. That's the key with boundaries. That's the key with work and significant others. That's the secret, right? It's just to figure out what you want and write that down and start moving toward it, thinking of ways to accomplish what you want so that you are taking action every day on getting what you want. And if you don't do that, all the boundaries in the world aren't going to help you, but then nothing will help you because you're going to wind up with a life of default. It's just, hey, we started driving and we wound up here. Yeah, Manitoba.
It's cold.
Sure, it's cold. And sure, it's north. And sure, we're out of gas and the engine's seized up anyway. Because
that sounds horrible.
We didn't play. Okay, to all of our loyal fans and listeners in Manitoba, there's nothing wrong with Manitoba for 2 weeks a year. It's lovely. No,
we love you, Manitoba.
But, it's just, I could have said any other city, but man, have you ever been to Manitoba? Woo! No, I'm sure it's a lovely place. I'm sure it's just absolutely wonderful. And so please pardon my humor, but it is really, really, really important. You talk about, goal setting is in general setting boundaries upon yourself. It's deciding what you want more than something else, I want to be lean and fit more than I want a dozen donuts every day. Right? That's not.
Now you're just getting crazy.
That's crazy talk. That's crazy talk. How dare you? How dare you?
For sure, though. It goes back to setting those boundaries for yourself and knowing. Well, I think my favorite part of this conversation tonight was the intentional reference, like being intentional,
right.
Being intentional with your life, setting boundaries are intentional. You're not being reactive, you're being proactive, and you're moving forward, and being assertive with all of the relationships that you have in your life, whether they be personal or professional, or even the relationship you have with yourself. And so I love it. I think it's important. I really, that's the main reason that I wanted to, talk about this topic, was to remind people that you have to have boundaries.
Right. So my thinking is, be aware that you're controlled by paradigms. You decide what your paradigms are. Be aware also that goals and boundaries are the same thing. They're kissing cousins. They're very, very close to one another. You set a goal for any given thing, and what you're really doing is you're saying, below this given standard, my behavior is unacceptable, or my decisions are unacceptable, or my business or my relationship or whatever is unacceptable below a given standard. Well, that given standard is your boundary below which you are unwilling to continue, right? Which means that your goal and your boundary is just pretty much the same thing. And so set your goals and encircle them with your boundaries. You hold yourself to your own boundary, and then that will give you the fortitude to hold others to the boundary that you set. And respect their boundaries. And then you find yourself very happy, which is the ultimate goal anyway.
I love it. All right. Well, I think that we have, I think we've explored a lot of different things. I do think that this is a good start on helping people set boundaries. I mean, like I said, we could talk about this all night, but ultimately there's freedom in boundaries, and I think we've got some good stuff. So I think we'll wrap it up for tonight. So until next week, you guys, dream your life
And live your dreams.
Bye-bye.
Bye.